Well, hi there, wherever you happen to be today. This is Mike Hinkson, and you are listening to Unstoppable Mindset. Really glad you're here. We are going to have fun again today as usual and get inspired and do all those things that we do on Unstoppable Mindset. And again, I really appreciate you being here and hope you enjoy what we have to talk about today. We have Lorna on with us, and I'm going to let her introduce herself pretty much, except to tell you that she is an author who has written a whole bunch of books. When I met her, she had written 46 books. And since we last talked, she said she was going to be publishing 3 more by September. So one of course, the big questions of the day is, did you get to do that? But first, Lorna, welcome to Unstoppable Mindset. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Michael. Yes, it's Lorna Schultz Nicholson, and that is a long name, 3 names, and nobody ever spells Schultz, right? That's okay.
Well, how do you spell it?
Schultz.
That's the way I've always spelled it.
Good for you, because you have no idea how many people either forget the C or they forget the L or the T at the end. That's great.
Or they make it an S instead of a Z.
Well, I think they get the Z right because of Charles Schultz, right? They get that right because of the Peanuts.
Or Schultz from Hogan's Heroes.
Yes, but that's spelled the same way as mine.
Schultz.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, yeah, Z. Sorry. In Canada, we say Z.
Well, Z, yeah.
Yeah.
Schultz. Well, it is a British-oriented or whatever thing, or some sort an empire thing. Yeah, that's it. But
anyway, coming to you from Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. That's the other thing I guess I'll say when I introduce myself.
And of course, go Oilers. I know I saw that in your bio.
Yes.
and how did we do?
Well, the season, I did fine. I've got those 3 books coming out, so I'm now on my 49th published book, and I do have a spring book in the docket. So it's a picture book, so that will be my 50th book in the spring. But right now I'm sitting at 49.
49. Wow.
The 49th one was just released today.
And our hockey season. And how did our hockey season go? And how did
the hockey season was great last year. It hasn't started this year. It'll be starting up. They're in training camp right now. The players in training camp. They will be starting up mid-October, sort of beginning of October, mid-October. The first games will happen. They'll go into some preseason games here. We all have to watch baseball for a little while until hockey starts, because of course they're wrapping up the end of their season. So we all get excited about that too, to watch World Series.
And in addition to hockey and baseball, do you ever watch basketball?
I do, actually, because I'm a Toronto Raptors fan. So
there you go. Okay.
Yep, absolutely. I like watching basketball too. And football.
We love college football. And right now we're very happy because my wife, Karen, is a graduate of USC.
Okay.
And she did her graduate studies there. And the team is doing really well this year. We have no major complaints. First time in a long time. So we're very pleased about that.
That's exciting. Very exciting.
They're 3-0 in all 3 games. They scored more than 40 points per game.
Oh, I have a brother-in-law who always fights with its USC and UCLA. There's always a big rivalry between those 2, right?
Oh, there is.
Oh, yeah. Now, that happens in my family because they live down in California. So there's always this rivalry that goes on in the family between the 2.
And which one does he like?
You know, that you knew you were going to ask me that, and I think he's the UCLA.
Well, we understand that there are those people in the world who are less fortunate than we, and that's okay. Well, see, my story is that on the day we got married, our wedding was supposed to start at 4:00, and it didn't start until 4:15 because at 4 the church was less than half full, and at 4:12, suddenly the doors opened and this whole throng of people came in. And so we finally were able to start. When we asked somebody later, what the heck was the deal? Why was everybody late getting there? And they said, no, nobody was late. They were sitting out in their cars waiting for the end of the USC Notre Dame game. So one that tells you where we were in the priority of things, but SC whomped Notre Dame, so we knew the marriage was going to last.
Oh, I love to hear that. That's a lovely story. That's a good story.
Well, tell us a little bit about you, kind of where you came from, your life a little bit, and we'll go from there.
Well, I actually grew up in Ontario, St. Catharines, Ontario, which is really, really close to Niagara Falls, and Niagara Falls, New York, Niagara Falls, Canada. And then I did a lot of moving around and all that, that we all do, and going to university and that kind of thing. And I wasn't always a writer. I mean, I should go back and say that that's not exactly true, but I didn't always think that I was going to be a writer. Like, I never grew up thinking that I was going to be an author. Like, I have some author friends who grew up saying, I knew I was going to be an author. I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to do that when I was little. And I didn't have that. I wanted to be an athlete. Like, if you had have asked me when I was a child, they'd say, what do you want to be when you grow up? I'd say an athlete. And my mom and dad would say, because in my era, of course, my parents said, that's not really a profession. You can't really do that. So, I went into other things that had to do with sports. Like, I got a science degree in kinesiology and, worked in the fitness industry. And then when my children were little, I decided to take a writing course, and I discovered how much I loved writing. And then it brought me back to my childhood of how much I loved to read, and how I loved to write stories when I was a kid, that I just never pursued the writing avenue, but I did actually love writing stories. So it was a little bit of a full circle for me, and it didn't happen, in my 20s. I didn't get my first book published until I was in my 40s. And I worked really hard in those late 30s. After that course, I sort of got like jazzed up, and I wanted to write, and I wanted to be a writer, and I wanted to be published. And of course, that takes years to happen. You have to keep trying and trying and trying, and keep submitting and keep writing another story. And then finally I got a book published in 2004. So, I mean, I was in my early 40s when that actually happened. So for anybody who's listening out there who wants to write, and you think, well, I didn't do this in my 20s, and I didn't go to university for it, and I didn't get an English degree, you can keep trying. Just keep trying.
Well, and it's always about trying. And I take the tact also that if you don't happen to want to write a book or whatever, you do at least have stories to tell.
Everybody has a story to tell. Everybody, and I do a lot of writing classes as well. I teach a lot of writing classes. I teach a lot to kids, because I write mostly children's. I do write some adult, but I write a lot of children's literature. And so I'm often in schools, or at workshops, writing workshops for children, and they're keen writers, or they're not. And if they're not, I tell everybody, you have a story to tell. Everybody has a story to tell. And out in the world, there are lots of stories. So I think that that's the most important part about writing is the story part of it.
One of the things that I find, and I love to tell people, is if you don't think that you would be a good guest on the podcast because you don't necessarily talk about whatever our mission is, what I tell people is, well, our mission is to inspire people more than anything else. We do talk about disabilities. We do talk about inclusion, and of course, being blind and wanting to get people to have a little bit different view of what blindness and disabilities are all about. I'm always glad to do that. But at the same time, the general purpose of this podcast is really to show people they can be more unstoppable than they think. And so as I go out and I look for guests, and we search in a number of different ways, but people often say, well, I don't know that I would really be good for your mission. And then I say, well, but our mission is to inspire, but I don't really know what to talk about. And I say the same thing that you just said. Everyone has a story to tell. And so my job is to help people really find or remember what their story is and talk about it. And there's no formal way or anything else to do that. It's more an issue of, you have a story and we want to hear it.
Yeah, I agree with you. I do think that everybody has a story. And I mean, Michael, you have a story because were you blind at birth?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So you have a story, and you're doing a great job with this podcast by getting people, to tell their unstoppable story, but also to inspire people to do other things. And I do write a lot about different disabilities. I have a series that I've written that's called the One-to-One series. A book has just been published in the series. It's called Behind the Label. And in that series, I've looked at the first book had a character with autism, high functioning autism. The second book was a character that was born with Down syndrome. I have featured fetal alcohol spectrum disorder in it. And I think it's really important that, I'm going to say Behind the Label is the latest book that came out, but that we do look behind that label too. So we look behind your label of your disability of being blind, and then we find your true story and how you can help others as well, maybe go through what they're going through.
Of course, one of the things that I have pointed out a number of times on this podcast, and I love to tell people, is if we're going to really talk about people with disabilities, then we really have to recognize that everyone has a disability. Specifically for most of you, your disability is that you are light dependent. You don't do well if the lights aren't on. And electric lighting is a relatively new invention. It came around in the mid 1800s, but the reality is you guys don't do well without lights. And in the workplace, companies and builders provide lights in the ceilings and all sorts of lights so people can see to get around and so on. But that's your problem and not mine. I don't happen to have that disability. And we need to recognize that everyone does have a challenge. People take it for granted. Well, I'm not really disabled because I can get around. Yeah, let's see how you do in a dark room. And let's see how well you read in a dark room. Or let's see how well you function in other ways when lighting conditions aren't great, because we're always looking for the best lighting conditions. So the reality is we all have disabilities, and we should recognize that, so we don't try to say that we're better because we're not of the scope where our disability, if you want to call it that, is really less than yours, because it's not. We all have them. And it's an equalizing thing, I think, among all of us in society in general.
I totally agree with that. And that's a very, very interesting concept. Thank you for saying that, because I never really thought of it that way. Like, I'm thinking now, of course, when I turned my computer on, the first thing I thought of was, oh no, I forgot my ring light in in Penticton. I have a summer place that I go to by the lake. And so I was coming back yesterday. I drove back yesterday and I forgot my ring light. My ring light is there. I'm thinking, I don't have my ring light. Oh my goodness. So that's not something that you even thought of before this podcast. You didn't think to yourself, oh gosh, I don't have my ring light. You didn't think of that. And that's very, very interesting for you to say that. And I thank you for that, because I think that's something that, we people who have our vision, we don't even think about. And it's true. We don't know how to walk in the dark. We don't know how to turn off our lights and feel around and try to find our way to our bed. Like, we keep our little night light on so that we can get there. So that's a really interesting comment. And I do agree with that I think that the more that we look at the world as a whole and look at all the individuals who are in our world and look at the fact that we are each and every one of us different. And I'm not sure why we have to put everybody into sort of so many boxes. Like, why can't we all just live together and sort of understand that we're all different and we all have a different makeup? Like, even identical twins are different.
Sure.
They have small differences, and they're not exactly the same in their personalities.
So maybe we should work together and write a book, or you write a book, and I'm glad to help on blindness. And we bring out some of these concepts. It might be kind of fun to explore.
Very fun to explore. I mean, a friend of mine actually did write one where she had a visually impaired runner, and you know how then they tether them together. And I was just watching that running race the other day with this gal who was just running like the wind, and she had a runner beside her, and she was visually impaired, and it was really incredible. I was just like, wow, that's impressive. That's good, really good.
But of course, the question is, why should it be viewed as being so incredible? And the answer is, of course, most people can't imagine doing it without eyesight. And the reality is eyesight has not a lot to do with it if you look at it a different way. It's all about information gathering and having the information that you need. And certainly eyesight is one way to get information, but it's by no means the only way that we get data, and nor should it be the only way we get data. And the difficulty is that so often people who can see really think eyesight's the only real game in town. And for a number of years, the Gallup polling organization classified blindness specifically as one of the top 5 fears that people felt they faced. And it shouldn't be that way. But we really don't look at the reality that blindness isn't the problem, it's our perceptions. And there are a lot of ways to get information far and away, even in some senses superior to eyesight, but we just don't look at it that way because we're used to seeing and we think that's the only way to do it.
Do you think that your other senses have been heightened? That perhaps, I mean, people that have eyesight are very visual, like visually, what would be the word for it? That's probably their top choice, right?
Sure, because that's what they're used to. I do not think that senses are heightened simply because we don't see. I think they're heightened if we use them. That's why some of the examples that I use are military teams like SEAL Team 6 or any of the high functioning, very specialized military teams that have learned to use their eyesight. They see better than anyone else because they've learned to use that sight. They've learned to process the information more effectively because of what they see, but they've also learned to use their other senses. And so those senses are also heightened because they've learned to use them. And so the result is that they're not heightened simply because you lose one or not. They're heightened because you make use of them and you recognize that they are as valuable as eyesight for getting as much information about your environment or whatever it is that you need to deal with.
So it's kind of like, in a way, people that have vision are a bit lazy with their other senses.
You could say that.
We allow our vision to be our strong sense. It's like, in your body, like if you work out, your hamstrings and your glutes, you always use your quads. You don't necessarily, there's certain muscle groups that take over. So maybe we just let our vision take over and we become a bit lazy and we don't use all our senses. And, getting back to me teaching classes, this is one of the things that I try to teach students is that use all your senses when you're writing, because it's very, very easy as a writer to just write with the visual. And so you write what somebody looks like. You write that they wore this, they wore that, they did this. It's all visual. And I try to tell students, and I try to do it with my own writing. Sometimes I'll write something and then I'll take a look at it and I'll say, well, Lorna, you didn't use your senses in this. Now, how can you add this in? What did the person smell when they walked in? Did a feather, did they walk into a barn and a feather hit their nose and then they sneezed? So what was the sense of touch? And hearing, I mean, it's all really important to put those senses in in writing. It's super important, and it is very, very easy just to write with the visual. And a lot of kids will do that. So then it's up to me to say, you know what? Let's look at everything else here. Let's look at all your other senses when you're writing this. So that's something that's interesting too. Is that I think that it's even more important now that I've chatted with you. I'm thinking, wow, like this is really interesting. I mean, this is something that I can talk to kids about, that we need to do this more.
Well, the issue is that, of course, your expertise is in eyesight. And that's why I suggested we ought to explore doing a book, and that's something that we can talk about. But the reality is your expertise is in eyesight. You can gain more expertise in other senses, but the odds are, because the world has been shaped around eyesight, that's what you're going to use. And I appreciate that and understand that. And we love you anyway. But
thank you.
But the bottom line is, it is the way the world is shaped. And so as a result, we don't really look at our other senses in the way that we can, which isn't to say that if you're writing a book about a blind person, that you so emphasize the other senses that you don't talk in the vernacular that people are used to. So, for example, I watch TV. I go to watch and see movies. And the reason that I say that is not because of an eyesight issue, but rather the Webster's Dictionary defines see in one of its definitions as to perceive. So why shouldn't I use see as well as anyone else does? We've got to get away from the concept that that's the only game in town, that is eyesight, which, and I don't know whether you've read my book, Thunderdog, which is a book that we wrote about not only me growing up as a blind person, but my story of being involved in the World Trade Center on September 11th, 2001. But in Thunderdog, one of the things that I say is, don't let your sight get in the way of your vision. And it's absolutely important that people start to realize that, because we talk about vision. And I think I've got tons of vision. I just don't see so good, as I love to say to people. But vision is there. And I don't object to people using the word vision relating to eyesight, but it is not the only way and not the only definition of the word.
I really like that comment. Don't let your sight get in the way of your vision? Don't
let your sight get in the way of your vision.
That's a very, very good comment. That's a good line. That's a very good one. No, I haven't read your book, but now I'm going to.
I hope you will.
Yeah, for sure. Like, it sounds really interesting. And
it was a #1 New York Times bestseller. He brags, and but it is intended to teach people more about blindness and blind people, and I hope you and others who haven't read it will read it. Also, being a poor, starving author, we need people to buy books anyway, so. it's important. But here's another one, and then I've got lots of questions for you, but here's another one. People say that I and other people who happen to be blind are visually impaired. Look at the wording, visually impaired. Now, the last time I checked, when you talk about something visual, and you talk about something that's visually oriented, it's about how it looks. And I don't think that I'm impaired simply because I'm blind from a visual standpoint. I don't even like low vision, because then you're still making it all about degrees of eyesight. I think that the fact is that low vision is probably certainly a lot better than visually impaired or vision impaired, because again, I think I've got lots of vision. And to say that we're impaired with our vision or our eyesight is really a serious problem, because you're still then promulgating the class difference between people who happen to be blind or who don't see as well as most people and people who have better eyesight. So blind and low vision is probably at this point the best that we can do. It's sort of like deaf and hard of hearing. If you say to most deaf people you are hearing impaired, you're apt to be executed on the spot, because they recognize the value of words.
Right. So what are the words that we should use?
I would say right now the best words that I can give you are blind and low vision.
Okay. I mean, fair enough, because you know what? Sometimes we don't know. Sometimes
we don't
know. I don't know what I'm supposed to say. And the last thing that I want to do is say the wrong thing. But I mean, things go out there and we're told, you can't say that. So it is nice to hear it from you that this is what we should say. And that's blind or low vision.
And the other part about it is, of course, well, you're welcome. But the other part about it is you can't say that. That concept and that comment is a problem. The fact that we worry so much about political correctness is a problem. I think that if somebody says that I'm visually impaired, I'm not going to get too offended by that, but I am going to try to correct the concept, say, no, I don't think I'm visually impaired. Don't I look the same as most anyone else? You go back and look at what visually means, and I don't think that I'm any more visually impaired than you are, but I happen to be blind, or I can be considered low vision. But even most low vision people really ought to look at themselves as blind. And what do I mean by that? I subscribe to a definition of blindness that Kenneth Jernigan, a past president of the National Federation of the Blind, created. And his definition was, you are blind if your eyesight has decreased to the point where you have to use alternatives to full eyesight in order to accomplish tasks. So if you've got to use large print or a closed circuit television or a magnifier, the odds are you will probably lose more, if not all, of your eyesight at some point in your life. So now is the time to start to learn blindness techniques and to accept the fact that blindness isn't the problem and that you can function as a blind person in a world where most people don't happen to be blind. And if we would start to do that, we would learn that blindness, again, isn't really the issue that we face. It's more the misconceptions that people have.
Very interesting. And I mean, I think there are a lot of misconceptions with everything. I mean, every single difference in somebody, often there are misconceptions about it. And I think that, sometimes when I was writing, I remember writing the book about autism. I had a character that had autism and high functioning autism. And I remember being in a lineup in the grocery store, and all of a sudden I thought somebody was in front of me. And then I thought, you know what, maybe, I don't want to be impatient here, because it's that person maybe, there maybe they do have autism, or maybe they do have something that is just creating them to be a little slower. Is that that's not my deal. That's who they are. And I should respect who they are. And I think that that's really important in our world, is that we just respect who everybody is and what everybody is all about, and look for the inside of the person instead of that sort of outside that we're always looking at, which I use the word looking, which
That's
is
fine.
an interesting word, right?
Sure. And it's fine to use that word.
The word looking, because we do look. We do look, but you look in a different way.
But look doesn't necessarily need to be defined as with your eyes. And that's the real issue.
Right.
We're so oriented in our mindset overall of thinking about looking, you have to do it with your eyes. And that's where the breakdown comes, rather than recognizing that look means really to examine or explore in a number of different ways, and it doesn't necessarily need to be with eyesight.
Mm-hmm. And that's a very interesting concept, right? We can look, I guess we can look with our ears, or we can look with our senses, other senses, correct?
Well, look is a general sort of a thing. We listen with our ears, but it's part of looking around.
Right. Yeah, interesting. Very, very interesting. I like the use of your words. I like the use of how you're taking certain words that I may think are only visually, because of course I love words, right? I'm a writer. I love words. So you're taking words and you're spinning them a little bit for me. And
I'm taking sight. I'm taking sight orientation out of it.
Right. Yeah, which is very interesting.
Which is important. And so you see why our podcast, Unstoppable Mindset, can go off in all sorts of different directions that we never thought about when we started this.
Yeah, we're going off in a totally different direction, but it's
really fun.
It's really enlightening. It's really enlightening to me. I'm really actually learning a lot today. So this is really good.
Well, it's part of what makes life fun, going off and having adventures, and words are always important to have, and learning new concepts. And every time I have these conversations, I get to learn things and sort of even more effectively and hopefully efficiently define what I do and say. And so, yeah, I love it. It's enjoyable to do this. But I do have a question for you. You have written a lot of books now relating to sports, and how come?
Because I love sports, and I loved sports as a child. As I said, when my parents would ask me what I wanted to be people would ask what I wanted to be when I grew up, I always said, I want to be an athlete. Everybody would look at me like, okay, well, that's not really a profession. What are you talking about? I loved sports as a child. I played everything you can possibly imagine, everything I possibly was there for me. And it was something that was really big in my life. So sometimes there's that old saying that write what you know. And especially when you're starting off writing, it makes it a little bit easier. I mean, blindness, you could write about blindness. So it's like, write what you know. And I knew about sports. So I wrote a tremendous amount about sports. And really interesting, just a little side note here, I wrote a book called When You Least Expect It, and it's about a rower. And I was a rower in high school. I grew up in St. Catharines, Ontario, which is, as I said, close to Niagara Falls. It was a really big rowing community, and I got into a boat and I rowed, and I, went on and was on the national team and, won the Canadian championship. And we went down to Philadelphia, we went down to Princeton, we went down to all kinds of places to row. And I really, really loved it. And the book ended up winning an award this year. It won the R. Ross Annette Award for the Writers Guild of Alberta. And so I won some money for that. And I decided that I would give back, and I would give a little scholarship, give half of the money away to somebody who was finishing rowing at the St. Catharines Rowing Club where I grew up, and they were going to go into university. I ended up giving it to, and I don't want to say visually impaired, low
vision person.
Yeah, because she sent me this letter. So I asked for the criteria. They had to send me their admission letter and tell me that they were going to continue on with the sport. And then they had to write a letter to me about, something to do with my main protagonist and how, they related. And she sent me this lovely letter about how, she really wanted to be in sports, but she found it difficult for some of the sports, but then she found rowing. And as somebody with low vision, this was something that she could be very successful at. And she actually went in a single and in the Paralympic race at the Henley, and she won the gold medal. So very interesting. And she rode in a 4, but I think to get her bearing, she was able to sit in the 4, and then, a coxswain would, steer the boat down, and all. She just had to hear for the sounds of the water to put the oar into the water. So I just thought I'd share that, seeing as I'm talking to you today. So that was the letter that inspired me. I was like, this is good. This is inspirational. And that's what this show is about, because she was unstoppable. She wasn't going to say no, like, no, I can't do this. She just went out and found somewhere where she could be an athlete and be successful and go on to university and follow her dream and follow her passion.
A friend of mine, Ariel Gilbert, who I've known for a long time, I met her when I was working at Guide Dogs for the Blind, and she was working there as well, is an international rower, and also was involved in the Paralympics. And actually, when the Olympics were held last, I think, in California, she was one of the people who carried the torch for a mile. And so has been very involved in the Olympics and very, very heavily involved in rowing, and has done it for a number of years. She had to stop for a while because of some kidney issues, but that all got straightened out and she's started again.
Oh,
so she's been rowing for quite a while. And the reality is it's a very doable sport. And she tells the story about how people didn't think that she could do it. And she said, of course I can. Let me at least have a shot at it. And it didn't take very long during the shot at it for people to recognize that she was going to be as good as anyone else, which makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I was so impressed with the letter, to be really. And she was the one who got the scholarship or the bursary. She got the bursary. I emailed her and I said, your letter, I loved your letter. I thought that, you explained everything to me quite well. And, here's your money and go forth and go to university and join your crew and keep going at it. And, she just said it was a place where she felt that she could make some friends and, she just found success, and it is doable. It's a very, very doable sport for that. So, when I wrote the book, When You Least Expect It, it's not what I expected. So, it was when you least expected that I would, donate the money back and then get these letters in and then all of a sudden end up on your show. To tie all of this together. And I kind of like when things like that do happen because, as I said, everybody has a story to tell. And it was a really, really interesting story. So thank you for sharing with me about that other woman who, what was her name again?
Ariel Gilbert. She lives up in the Bay Area in California.
I'll look that up because very interesting. This other gal said, yeah, it was a very doable sport for her. And
As with a lot of things, the biggest problem is, again, people's perceptions. Well, the belief is you've got to see to do it. And the question is why? Even driving a car today technologically can be done, although the technology isn't in wide use and isn't really in ready for primetime use. And I'm not talking about an autonomous vehicle, but rather a person truly being able to drive. Why should we view that as only something that a person with full eyesight can do with the amount of information that is truly available to us with technology today? And there has been demonstrations of a blind person truly driving a car, getting information from the vehicle that allows them to be on a road, or the one thing I'm thinking of, and I've talked about it here before, is the now president of the National Federation of the Blind, Mark Riccobono, drove a Ford Escape around the Daytona Speedway right before the 2011 Rolex 24 race, driving through an obstacle course, passing a vehicle, and a number of other things, because the car was transmitting through some additional instrumentation on the car, information to Mark that allowed him to safely be on that course and drive around the course successfully. Again, eyesight's not the only game in town. And yeah, will that technology be something that gets built into cars so more blind people can use it? Hopefully in some way, at least, if nothing else, when we start to deal more with autonomous vehicles, and until we get to the point where they're 100% foolproof, which is going to be a ways away, it's going to be probably mandated that someone needs to be behind a steering wheel and be able to take control of the vehicle if something breaks down or drops out during the autonomous vehicles driving or technology driving the vehicle. I want to have the same opportunity to do that as anyone else, at least to be able to safely pull the car to the side of the road. And the fact is the technology exists to do that. Mm-hmm,
mm-hmm. It's typical with sports too. A friend of mine wrote a book with it was a children's book, but it was a hockey book. I write a lot of hockey books because I live in Canada. But they had a puck. They had a puck that had like a, I don't know, it's a rock or something in it. And the puck, so when they stick handle down the ice, they could hear the puck.
Hear it, yeah.
Yeah, it's something that's used with people that are blind can play hockey because they can actually hear the puck, and so then they can pass it over and they can hear it, and then they can.
There's some interesting and extremely active sports that blind people are involved with, and of course, the whole concept of physical fitness is becoming more of an issue that a lot of us are paying attention to. And again, even exercise programs can be very accessible if we verbalize rather than just showing things on a screen or through a camera lens or whatever. And the fact is that there are a lot of ways to make it possible for more people to be included in what people think are otherwise not accessible or not any kind of activities that people without eyesight can do, because eyesight is not the only game in town. There are many blind scientists and blind people who have participated in other things. For many years, it was assumed that no blind person could teach. And that eventually was addressed. And now it's fairly commonplace, although there are many school districts that still won't hire a person because the belief is that you have to see to be able to do it. And you don't. And so it is a constant thing to explore and to hopefully do more to educate people about, which is really what it is. It's an educational process.
Oh, 100%. 100%. I think that it's all, the more that someone like you, with your podcast, you're educating people. You've educated me even a little bit, like a lot, actually. And, I think that that's important as well. And I think that technology has probably perhaps helped the blind out tremendously.
Well, it's helped all of us. I mean, we talked about the electric light bulb, right? That made it possible for us to do so many things after dark. Because before the light bulb, we had to go use candles or light torches. Technology is helping all of us. And it has only in a relatively shorter time been recognized that we can use technology to further advance the inclusion that we all want. But, things like insulin pumps for people who have diabetes who happen to be blind, those insulin pumps use touch screens and other things. And only recently, I believe in the US at least, has the FDA finally approved one that uses an app on a phone that is accessible so that a blind person can actually, as a diabetic, use an insulin pump. And the fact is that we have so got ourselves locked into touch screens now that we find that more and more things are becoming inaccessible to us who happen to be blind or low vision, especially blind, because we can't see the icons on a screen. And it's ironic that there's no need for that, because today we know that there are ways to make touchscreens accessible. Apple was very clever about doing that when they finally made the iPhone accessible. They had to do that because they would have been sued if they hadn't, but they got creative and they did it. So now every iPhone and Android phones, although it's still not quite progressed to the same level, but every iPhone and Android phones have built in to the software the things to make them more usable for people who don't happen to see or see well.
Right. What about books in Braille? Do you find that there's still not enough books in Braille?
Oh, I think there are still not enough books in Braille. But ironically, again, the issue is that many books are being published electronically, but what they are photos saved in some sort of format of printed pages of books. And so those are not accessible. And so when books are made electronically, it's important that there be some sort of text version of the book so that they can be made available for people who happen to be blind again, or who could listen to them. Braille is still the means of reading and writing that I have available to me. And a lot of teachers talk about Braille as being something that we really don't need anymore because blind people can listen to books and so on. Well, if that's the case, then why don't we allow sighted kids to just watch cartoons? Why do we want to teach them print? The concept is still the same. We haven't progressed to really understand that there are true alternatives to eyesight. So a lot of people think a blind person can't write. Now, I happen to collaborate with people when I write. I find that helpful for me. But by the same token, the issue is that the technology exists for me to be able to write. I use a standard keyboard. You have a process that you use to write. you use a computer and a keyboard, but what's your whole writing process? You've written a lot of books. You have to have a process for that.
Yeah, I have a process. I generally start with an outline. There's a lot of thinking that goes on before a book gets published, right? Or before you even start writing a book, not even before it gets published. You think a lot about what you're going to write. You think about how the story should start, where the story should end. I mean, there's a lot of that goes on before you even start. Sometimes you can think about a book for a year and then you finally start it. And I often do an outline before I start. Not everybody does. I'm not somebody who says, oh, you have to do this, you have to do that. Everybody has to follow their own process. And my process, it tends to be a bit of an outline because I like to know the ending before I start, just because it saves me time once I do begin. And then once I begin, I go at it. I go at it until I finish the first draft. And then once I've finished the first draft, then I can sit back because the first draft is the bones. It's never very good. It's always not very good. And I have to edit it and I have to revise it and work on it and mold it and make it what it's going to be. Even before I send it to like my agent, even before it gets out, and she'll give me notes or I'll give it to friends even to take a look at, to give me notes, to tell me stuff that's not right with it. And then of course, when it goes to an editor. So I'm a sort of beginning to end finish. And then, then I go back and I revise and I revise and I revise. That's sort of my process. I have a novel that I have to work on here soon and I've got the outline done. And I need to, I thought a lot about it and I did write the first chapter and now I need to just dive back in and get the book finished. But I do have an ending in sight and an outline for it. So that's generally my process.
Have you ever had a book that has really taken on a life of its own and maybe even though you wrote an ending that by the time it was done, the whole ending and everything changed about the book?
Oh, yeah. That does happen. And sometimes, for instance, with this series that I was telling you about.
One-to-one.
Yeah, the one-to-one series. I was in, I think, the third book, and Harrison was my autistic character in the first book. And I'm in the third book, and I'm writing away, and I've got Madeline, and she has this brain injury, and I have a really good girlfriend who has a brain injury. So I kind of took and I spent a lot of time with her. Over the years, and so I'm writing away, and all of a sudden Harrison sort of comes back into the story because the teens sort of come in and out of the stories, and they all go to the same high school together. And this character came back in, and I was like really excited to see him. I was like, oh, he's back! I'm so excited! And I had not planned that at all. That was simply came out of the blue. And his voice just came right back to me, and I was right back into writing about him. And, he wanted to ask Madeline to dance. It was really fun. I was like, this is so fun. So, yes, it does happen that sometimes it just goes off on a tangent and something appears, and then you just go with it. I just went with it, and I was, thrilled to have him back in my story. So it was really, really fun. And that was one of those days where I pushed my chair back at the end of my writing session and went, oh gosh, that was so incredibly fun to do. So that does happen for sure. Yeah.
So did Harrison and Madeline hit it off?
Well, they did.
Okay.
Thank you for asking. I loved their interaction. I was like, this is so good.
Well, maybe they will become a thing, or did they become a thing?
Maybe they'll become a high school thing. Who knows?
Yeah.
I'll leave that up to them.
There's nothing wrong with that.
No, gosh, no. No, that's okay. That's good. Anyway, yeah, so that does happen for sure. And that makes it really fun when it does.
That's cool.
So I allow that to happen. I do allow the book to go off onto a tangent and maybe finish somewhere else that it's never finished before. So,
well, your characters are part of you in a lot of different ways. And so it's interesting that they can come back and say, no, we think we should go this way.
Exactly. And that's okay. And that's cool because that's who they are. And they're just telling me something. So, and I enjoy that process and I enjoy that part of it for sure.
Do you have yet a favorite book from all the ones that you've written that you would identify as kind of your favorite so far?
no. I'm going to say no to that. I think every book is a different process. It's a different book. Some books write themselves. Some books, are harder. Sometimes it's harder I have to figure out the character. Of course, the rowing book was, based a little bit on me as a teenager. So that has a really special place in my heart, but it doesn't mean it's my favorite.
Right.
No, I'm going to say no.
Well, that's fine. You just have a lot of fun with all of them, which is
Yes,
great. So what does your husband do?
Oh, my husband works for the Edmonton Oilers.
He works for the Oilers. That's why you said go Oilers. I got it. What does he do?
Yeah, I have to. I don't have a choice. I got to wear the jersey. I got to wear the gear. No.
So you're not going to go off and root for the Flames and embarrass him, huh?
No. That would never happen. No. No, he works for the Edmonton Oilers. So, I'm an Oilers fan.
What does he do?
Well, he's got a pretty good job with them. He's like their vice president, I think they call him.
Cool. I tried ice skating once, and it was a challenge for me. And I eventually, as we were actually going off the ice, I finally fell and sprained my ankle. But so I've not ice skated since, but it's one of those kinds of things that I never really caught on to. And I admire so much people who are able to do it, much less the figure skaters and so on, and all the things that they can do.
Oh, it's amazing. It's, sometimes I look at photos of like a figure skater or a hockey player, and you can see them over on their edge on that one line. It's a really, really fine line. And it's pretty incredible that they can actually balance on that.
Yeah, and the hockey players who can just do that for so long, so fast, and so well.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's actually, it's a really fun sport to write. And I've written a lot of hockey novels because of the speed that I can, the speed, the sounds, the puck going off the boards, the scraping of the ice. So there's a lot there that I'm allowed to use my words. And so it's fun because it's fast. So I can get going into like a scene where it's fast and furious, and they're moving and scraping and doing all kinds of fun things. So yeah, it's good. I like it.
I think for my part, I could probably learn to drive a Zamboni.
Oh, there you go. And you can wave to everybody.
That's it. But that's a lot of fun to be able to do the things that they do. And I admire not only hockey, but all sports people, because they hone some skills so well and so much that it makes it a lot of fun. And the reason we really love college football is, although it's still becoming more of a money thing, still college sports tend to be a lot more fun and still somewhat less commercial than professional sports, which makes them a lot more enjoyable.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, for sure. I think it's very fun, especially down in the States, to be. My son went to the University of Arizona, and that was one of the biggest things that he really wanted to participate in, was going to the football games. I mean, for him, that was just such an experience to participate in college football and be like a fan. He really enjoyed that. That was kind of something he'll never forget.
It's a whole different culture being, I think, a college sports fan than a professional sports fan. Just it's a whole different environment.
Yeah. He really enjoyed it, and he went to all the basketball games. He really, really enjoyed that part of his college experience. So,
yeah, even though, as I said, we love USC and we enjoy that, just watching the games are a lot more fun. So, of course, this year we'll get to see our two major rivalries. It'll be SC against UCLA, and then it'll also be SC against Notre Dame. And those are the two big ones that we tend to watch, but we're really enjoying college football. And one of the things that we've really seen, and I've become much more convinced of over time, is how much the coach really does impact the team. I mean, look at what's happening at SC this year. They're 3-0, and they've been playing so poorly in previous years. And I think their coach in the past just wasn't really ready to be in the same kind of environment that a USC team is, because he's a winning coach. He's gone off elsewhere now and he's winning. So I think he's found a better niche, and the person who came in to coach the USC team is doing really well.
Well, it's the gel too, the gel of the people with the coach and all that sort of stuff. I mean, there's so much that goes into a team that actually ends up winning, and so much of it is more than just the skill. It's the psychological and the mental game that the team has as a team. Yeah, it's huge.
And it's interesting listening to the announcers talk about what's happening again at SC this year, how Lincoln Riley, the coach, is getting all the people on the team to really interact outside the games and feel like more of a team.
Yeah.
And that's pretty impressive. And there's a lot to be learned there about teamwork and the value of what, in a sense, the coach does. And people talk about the quarterback in football being the leader, but in some ways, the coach brings a different dimension to it. And if the coach is doing a good job, then that's going to help the rest of the team by any definition.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Do you get a lot of coaching from people when you write?
Oh, 100%. I always attribute, because I was an athlete, I always attribute my editors as my coaches. Uh-huh. Editors are so valuable. Like, and a good editor is huge. And I look forward to their comments and their, this didn't work, or this character isn't quite resonating with me. I think you need to go a little deeper into this, or you need to look at the depth of the emotions with this. I didn't quite get it. And I think, oh, okay, I thought that I'd done it, but maybe I haven't, when the reader actually takes the book over, when the editor takes the book over. So a good editor is so worth it to an author. And it's a huge. Oh, it's huge, huge.
A good editor isn't going to change the book unless it just is horrible. What the purpose of a good editor is to help you flesh out the book.
Yes. And a good editor, I mean, by the time you get to publication, though, I mean, it's been accepted because it is a book that's got something, right? Or else it'd be rejected. So you finally get there, and then, but then you still have to work with that editor, and that editor will have some thoughts. But you're 100% correct in saying that a good editor doesn't want to change the book. They just want to make it better.
Yeah.
And that's important.
And they've learned how to do that.
100. Yeah.
So what kind of tips, I love to ask this question, what kind of tips do you have for people who want to write, or for other writers?
A couple tips. I would say, number one, be a reader. I think that it's huge. I've taught lots of courses, and if I get somebody who says, "Oh, I don't like to read," I think, how are you going to be a writer? Like, reading is super important. I also think, just write. Don't try to edit yourself as you begin to write. Like, think of your story. Remember, at the very, very beginning, we talked about story, and story is hugely important. So just think about what your story is, what it is you want to tell, and how you want to tell it, and who do you want to tell it. And that's important too, because the voice of the story is really important. So if you look at it that way, and then you think of story first, and then think of the writing, as you get the story down, then you can write. And then don't be afraid to edit. Don't be afraid to go back over and over and over it and just make it better. Don't think it's done after the first draft. And persistence and perseverance is really important.
Do you, when you're writing, or once you've written a draft, do you share it with a cadre of people to get their thoughts and reviews as you're going through?
Yeah, I have. Depending on what I'm doing. Like, if it's a book that I have signed a contract before I've written the book, which I do have some publishers that I work that way with. But recently I just wrote a thriller novel, which is an adult novel, which hasn't been published yet. It was just a COVID experience because I was bored. I was tired of watching Tiger King, all those shows. So I wrote this book and I needed some guidance with it. So I asked some friends to read it, like, and then we would have a Zoom call and I would get their take on it. Did you get this? Did you get that? Did you understand this? Maybe it needed more. So yeah, I will. It depends on the book.
Yeah.
And what I'm doing. Yeah. So for sure. I think it's really good advice for new authors is to
can help flush the story.
100%. But make sure you're going with people that you trust, because you don't want to get it, like if you get bombarded with feedback and it's conflicting feedback, then that can be really difficult too. So you want to get the feedback. You want to go to people you trust. So maybe people that are in a writer's group, if they're in like 3 or 4 or 5 people, that can work really well, for sure.
Yeah, it's important to be able to get input, but be able to sift through it, because you're right. It can be very overwhelming, and you have to develop a little bit of a thick skin, not because you should be afraid of criticism, if you will, although people get worried about that, but rather it's a thicker skin that helps you be able to sift through it and look for the nuggets that each person brings to suggestions that may be valuable for you.
Yeah, thick skin is super important in this business.
Yeah, always is.
Yeah, it's a very important part of the business.
Well, this has been really fun. We've been doing this now for a little over an hour, and I really appreciate it.
I got to take my dog to the vet.
Oh my gosh. Or is the dog taking you?
Well, probably the dog taking me.
Yeah, there you go. What kind of dog?
Oh, I brought him home from Mexico. He's a rescue dog. I picked him up as a little puppy off the street and I brought him home.
Oh.
He's 9.5 now, though. He's older now. So I've had him for a lot of years.
Is he doing okay?
Yeah. Oh, he's great. He just has to go for his checkup and get his shots and whatever,
Yep. Alamo, my guide dog, goes tomorrow. We're taking dog and cat to the vet. Alamo is just going to get his shots and a physical, and Stitch, the cat, goes in for a pedicure to trim toenails and so on, because they're getting way too long.
Yeah.
And it hurts when she grabs a hold of you now. Yeah. So we're going to do that.
They got to go get their shots too. So I got to take them. So anyway, it's been great.
This has been fun.
Yeah, really fun.
Well, we should do it some more, and definitely we could talk about that book if you'd like. But I want to thank you again for being here.
We'll connect by email.
Well, we have to do that. And I want to thank everyone. I want to thank you all for listening. We really appreciate you being here. Would love to hear your comments. Send an email to me. I would love to hear from you, michaelhi@accessibe.com, or go to michaelhingson.com/podcast, and you can find contact information there. But also, Lorna, how can people reach out to you if they'd like to talk with you or learn more about you?
Oh, my email is Lorna, SN, LORNA, SN, @telus, TELUS.net. That one's pretty easy.
Yeah, that one is Lorna, SN, @telus.net.
TELUS.net. Yeah, that's how they can reach.
So there you go. If you want to talk to Lorna, please. And if you don't want to talk to Lorna, email her and tell her you love the podcast anyway. And of course, we would appreciate you giving us a 5-star review, whoever you are, wherever you are, and so on. You're listening to this. We appreciate your reviews and your thoughts. So thanks very much for listening to us. And Lorna, once more, thanks very much for being here on Unstoppable Mindset.
Thank you, Michael.